Thank you.
No, please, can we sit down and settle down? It's time for our next talk. We're kind of pressed on time, guys. Okay, for our next speaker, I'm going to let her introduce herself, and the title of the talk is Power to the Educators.
Thank you. All right. So, yeah, I'm going to introduce myself. My name is Sheena, and these are my emotions. So, who am I? I've been coding for a long time, since I was like a young teenager, and mostly I've worked in random startups and that kind of thing. I enjoy places where you have to solve a lot of weird problems, different problems, wear lots of different hats. For the last 5 years, I've been working primarily in technical education. So I basically built a bootcamp inside a bootcamp. It was weird, and I learned a ton of things. And I want to share some of that with you today. So the education work that I did was multifaceted. I have spent a lot of time training and mentoring individual learners and building up some skills around that. I've trained and mentored teachers. Teaching tech is not that straightforward, and so turning a tech into a teacher is something that I've done a few times over. I've also worked a lot on the system side of education, like how do we actually build a machine where people can work together and spread the skills. And to get that right, it takes quite a lot. It takes understanding people's brains. So, like, how does learning work? How does knowledge get retained? How do you get people to build effective mental models of the things that you're teaching? How do you keep people motivated? What tends to demotivate them? What do they do when they're feeling, I don't know, less than in different ways? There's also building, like writing code, writing software to make the system work. So, like building a learner management system that actually is a good experience for the learners is as a whole thing. And there's also human processes. So, for all of your understanding of the students and building of the stuff, if the people and the stuff don't mesh, then it's kind of a waste of time. So, you need to think about all of these things. So that's what I've been doing for the last 5 years. And I've developed some opinions, and I'd like to share some of them. But before I do that, I want to start off with something that everybody here is very familiar with, and that's a perfectly normal classroom situation. Like, picture it in your minds. You know what it looks like. There's a bunch of people sitting in a room, and they're all facing in the same direction, butts and chairs. There's a very steep ratio of teachers to learners, so maybe there'll be like one teacher at the front of the class wielding the chalk stick of authority, and lots of learners. And this teacher will be a bit of a sage on the stage. They've got the knowledge, they need to do the knowledge transfer. Everybody's moving at the same pace, so if you have a class and the class is learning a thing, everybody's learning that thing. They better be ready. And then there's projects and there's tests at certain times, so maybe they'll have quarterly tests and like a big exam at the end of the year, and that's how the assessment happens. And everyone's used to that, but a picture's worth 1,000 words, and so I'm going to draw a picture of a perfectly normal classroom situation. Perfect. Alright, cool. So this is a picture of a perfectly normal classroom situation. We've got a bunch of students, and they perform in different ways. So you have some people who are doing really, really well over there, and maybe it's because they are very clever and conscientious and work hard. Maybe they've got extra knowledge that other people didn't have when they came into this class. Maybe they've got extra support, they've got a private tutor. Then you get people on this side of the spectrum and they are not doing so great. And maybe it's because they are not that smart and kind of lazy. Maybe it's because they didn't eat food that day, they missed lunch. Maybe they were sick for a while and they're struggling to catch up. So there's lots of different reasons for people to be on either side of this. Now, some people pass and some people fail. So I'm just going to draw a line like straight down the middle there. Let's say like 50% of the people pass and 50% of the people fail, right? Think back to your own schooling. Did that happen? Like in high school or whatever? Yeah? 50-50?
Yeah.
Okay, really? Shit. Okay, wow. Okay, when I was in school, it was more like most people passed and then some people failed. But let's think about how to change that. Like, let's think about how to take that line from 50-50 and move it over there. Like, what are the different things you could do? So, one thing you could do is you could expect less of the students. You could say, like, we won't cover as much ground, we won't be as strict when we mark them, we'll look after them, you know, we'll make it easy. So that's one way to do it. Another way to do it, a better way to do it, is to get your teachers to be better at teaching. So get their explanations to be clearer, get them to motivate the students in better ways, get them to maybe pay attention to people who need help and help them in the ways that they need. So there's lots of different ways to move the line in a helpful direction. And those ways can be summarized as: you can increase the quality of your education, or you can decrease it. And different people do different things. So there's this guy named Bloom, and most educators have heard of Bloom. He's got like Bloom's taxonomy and things like that, and he's a fancy dude. And he did a whole lot of studies around like how learning works and how to build a classroom so that it works super well. And he came up with this thing called Bloom's 2 Sigma problem. And it's kind of heavy. The average student who's one-to-one using mastery learning techniques performs 2 standard deviations better than students educated in a classroom environment. That's a mouthful. It's a big mouthful. So let's go back to our page. So what Bloom says is that if we've got a perfectly normal classroom situation, and we've got something like 50% of the people passing, 50% of the people failing, and you change the delivery mechanism, so you don't change anything else, so like you assess the people on the same stuff, the same way, at the same time, all of that, but you change the delivery mechanism so that instead of it just being a stage on stage and everybody moves at the same time, you use mastery-based learning and one-on-one tutoring. Then this pass-fail line will move by 2 standard deviations. So instead of it being 50-50, it's going to be more like 97%-ish of people will pass, just by changing the delivery mechanism. So that's pretty cool. Let's do that always, right? So like, Bloom's 2 Sigma problem is a problem. And the problem is that it's very expensive to get right. It's kind of complicated, but you know, we actually have the technology now, so we can do it. So I'm going to drill into like the 2 things that he mentioned: mastery-based learning, one-on-one tutoring, and why that works. And even if you don't like implement it, it's something to learn from, and it's something that can be adapted to different situations. So mastery-based learning looks like this: you give a person a thing to learn, and then once they've mastered the thing, you give them the next thing to learn. Like, it's pretty straightforward, right? If they haven't mastered the thing, then you give them extra support, and they keep learning the thing until they've mastered the thing. Like, it's pretty straightforward. Like, it's a fairly obvious thing to do, and it makes a lot of sense to do it. Because, like, imagine you're teaching a class of people, and you're trying to teach them recursion, but there's like some person at the back who has not yet mastered functions. You as a teacher are wasting that person's time. Like, you as a teacher are doing something that isn't good for the student. And so it's very helpful to make sure they have the right building blocks in place. I mean, same thing for like iterating over multi-dimensional data structures. I mean, this is a useful skill, but first you should probably understand a little bit about single-dimensional data structures and perfectly normal iteration. So skills stack on skills. Skills stack on skills a lot, like really a lot, sometimes in not that obvious ways. So good education should care about foundational skills. The next part of Bloom's 2 Sigma problem was one-on-one tutoring, and that's very powerful. And I want you to just think about what that means. Like, if you picture yourself in your old classroom situation, And then imagine what it would have been like if you just had a one-on-one tutor for all of that stuff. Like, how would it be different? Well, there's like a few different ways. Firstly, it's more engaging for the learner, obviously. Like, you can't be gazing out the window and talking to your friends. It's like you're there, you're in the present tense. And there's a social contract as well. So, like, there's more of a relationship. If you come in and you have a one-on-one tutor and you've got a good relationship, and they're like, oh, you said you'd practice the thing, and you didn't, and you feel bad. You know, like, it's genuine. And then the other side, which is really, really powerful, is that it actually empowers the teacher as well, because the teacher can take the time to understand how the learner works and understand their mind, and give them what they need. So it's very, very powerful. Again, very expensive to get right. So lectures and classrooms, like, I'm generally not a fan of those, but this is kind of like a lecture, and I'm hoping it'll plant some seeds and do some good. But it's hard to get right. And it's even hard to know if you're doing a good job. Like, right now, you're all pretty quiet, which is cool. There isn't rustling around, things like that, mostly. So I can tell that people are engaged, and that's cool. But it doesn't necessarily mean that this knowledge is going to stick in your heads. It means that I'm like entertaining you, maybe. I don't know. So it's hard for me to get feedback about the quality of what I'm doing and how effective it is given my goals. But it's still useful. Okay, so I've been doing mastery-based learning for like a number of years now. Like, that's been my shtick. And I've been teaching other people to do it as well. And in doing this stuff, like, I've been getting a lot of feedback. Because if you think about it, if I give a student a thing to learn, and then I think they learned it, and then it turns out they didn't, that's feedback to me as an educator, and like, oh, this person is still struggling, let me see like how I can adapt my approach. And so it's great, because you get to learn a lot, you get a lot of feedback. Like, you feel the pain of your students suffering in this way, because you don't just move forward. And that's very, very helpful. So I've learned a bunch of things, and like, this talk isn't that long. So I can't share all of the things. And so I'm being very specific about the lessons that I'm bringing in here, because I think that they're the hardest hitting ones. So the first one is to do with this very, very quotable quote. Education is not the filling of a pail, but the lighting of a fire. It's like, it's poetic. It sticks in your head. And I'm sure most people here have heard it. Like, it's a very famous quote. But what does it mean though? Like, practically speaking, what does it mean? The way I think about teaching is in terms of time. So if I'm tutoring somebody, maybe I tutor them for like an hour, and then the rest of the week they're sort of on their own. The good I should do a lot of good in that hour, but ideally it should spread out. I should set the learner up so that they can continue learning and growing in all of this time. And there are ways to do that. So in that case, what is teaching? Like, what am I doing in that little session that I have with the learner? Is it about knowledge transfer? Yeah, sometimes it is. Like, sometimes you gotta just like give them the facts because there's something missing. Is it about answering questions? Yeah, why not? Like, if they have a question, you can help them out. Is it about solving problems? Yeah, that one's actually a sticky one. This is actually something that I've seen go wrong a lot of the time in technical education. If somebody's struggling with a coding thing and you come in and you're like, let me show you how to do it. That was empowering. Like, solving people's problems for them isn't the best thing. You never want to steal someone's problem because problems is how people learn. You don't want to, like, if you're teaching a person to ride a bicycle, you can't just ride the bicycle for them. So, like, yes, but sometimes you do need to solve problems within reason. So, yes to all of these with caveats. But the main thing to do is to think about planting seeds. Like, you want to set the learner up so that they continue to learn and grow on their own. And so you've got to set them up to behave, to have certain knowledge at the end of the session, and to have certain mindsets as well. So how do you want the learner to feel? Like, think about it. What should a learner feel at the end of a learning session? They should feel some enthusiasm and curiosity. Like, this stuff is worth getting good at. I think it's cool. They should feel like they actually have the capability to do this. It's not like, this is cool, but it's sort of like rocket surgery and not for me. They should have some idea of what steps to take and where to go. Like, they should have a direction to go in. And that direction should make sense. And you as an educator can help set that. Be like, oh, slow down, Tiger. Like, let's hit this first, and then do that as the next step. Because there is a lot of, like you should be in that. The next big thing I want to talk about is growth mindset versus fixed mindset. Has everybody heard of that? Yeah. So it's a very powerful thing. Just as a slight disclaimer, there is a replication crisis in social sciences at the moment, and there are some aspects of growth mindset that are being looked at pretty closely at the moment. The stuff that I'm talking about here are things that I've interacted with that seem right. So I'll start off with some definitions, just in case anybody here isn't like 100%. So a fixed mindset is the belief that either you have it or you don't. Like, I am a programmer or I'm not. This is something I can do or it isn't. Whereas a growth mindset is the belief that you can learn and grow and get these skills. And whether somebody has a fixed or growth mindset, it changes a lot about their behavior in different circumstances. There's a really good thumbnail over here for a podcast that I like a lot called the Huberman Lab podcast. And I'll share these slides with you guys, and you can, you'll scan the QR code and you can get this. But Huberman is a neuroscientist who works at Stanford, and he did a whole episode about growth and fixed mindset and a few other things, and it's really good. So I recommend listening to that. But so people with a growth mindset, they don't take failure personally, it's a lesson. They, if somebody with a growth mindset fails a test, then they'll think, maybe I could study harder for the test, maybe there's something that I didn't understand that I thought I understood and don't get some help, maybe I should study differently. Somebody with a fixed mindset, they'll just maybe say, this isn't for me, and maybe try something else. People with a growth mindset struggle in a positive way. So it's like, oh, this is difficult, that means I'm growing. And that's a really, really powerful thing, to look at struggle in a positive way. Like, I see a lot of people learning stuff, trying to do things the easiest way. Like, I will just watch a video to learn this thing. And that doesn't necessarily mean that they're learning. They're more willing to seek out help instead of hiding their deficiencies. Being willing and able to seek out help effectively is such rocket fuel for a career, it's crazy. So that's a very, very big deal. Because a good team is more than the sum of its parts, and being able to go and seek out help when you need it, it's top notch. And then the other thing is that people with a growth mindset tend to be less judgmental when others struggle. If I view my own struggles as something that makes me less than, and I see somebody else struggling at a thing, I could just be like, just give up. You're not going to make it. But if I see struggle in a positive way, then I can be more encouraging and helpful. So it's powerful, and there's a lot more to be said about it. It's a spectrum, so it's not like you either have it or you don't. Sometimes some days you're more confident than others. Some days, if you're struggling, you're like, shit, is this for me? And then you get over it, and it's something that changes, and it can be different for different things as well. Like, maybe I've got a growth mindset when it comes to programming, but a very fixed mindset when it comes to art, and just not that creative guys. And what's especially cool about growth mindsets is that it's something that you can build. Thank you for laughing at my meme. I appreciate you. so it's something that can be possible. Obviously, if you're teaching people, foster it in them. And there are ways to do that. If you see somebody struggling at a thing and then they overcome that struggle, you can celebrate the small wins. You can say hey, you just leveled up. Did you feel that? And they'll give a little laugh, and they'll recognize that this happened. Because often, if you're teaching a person a thing and they're struggling and they get over their struggle, and then they get into the next struggle and they get over their struggle, they remember the struggles. They don't necessarily remember the victories. And if you point that out, it's very, very powerful. Foster a growth mindset in yourself as a teacher. I don't know how many people in this room are teachers. I know there's at least one. Hey, very nice. And I know you're a mentor as well. And I think in tech, a lot of people get into places where they're mentor. I've seen a lot of volunteer run mentorship events and experiences that have been super, super powerful. And it's not something that you either have or you don't. It's something that you can grow. Teaching is a skill, it's a set of skills, there's science to it, there's art to it as well. So that is very, very worthwhile. Now, one thing that's super cool about mastery-based learning is that it actually helps to promote like positive behaviors that are associated with growth mindset. Because like if a person's learning a thing and then they have to finish that up before learning the next thing, and then they have to finish that up before learning the next thing, they stay on task. They learn that if they embrace the grind and push through the hard thing, there'll be a prize at the end. And then they'll get to another hard thing. They'll be like, oh, this is struggle. This is normal. So it's pretty cool. Like, the alternative is getting people to move forward sometimes when they're not quite ready. And then they're like, I failed again, this isn't good. So yeah, there's a lot to know about that. Yeah, so now I want to zoom in a little bit onto some practical things. So what does 1-on-1 tutoring look like? So this is a general way that I think about it. Like if I'm going to have a session with a learner or like a few learners. So yeah, like 1-on-1 tutoring is very expensive. I find like 1-on-3 works pretty well, 1-on-3 or 4, because you can understand people properly in that way. If you have too many people, then it's hard to get a good picture of what everybody's thinking. But with a small group, you can like be a successful mind reader. So yeah, so you have these small sessions with learners, and you need to prepare for them. Like it's strange, sometimes I see people go into learning experiences as a teacher where they don't necessarily know all the things that they're going to be teaching. I think like put in the work and prepare. And then when you're actually with the learner, I think of this as a kind of loop. You assess where they are, you assess where their gaps are, you assess where their skills are, you lead with understanding. And then you fill in the gaps and illuminate and lead them along and coach them. And then go back to trying to understand where they're at, what they need, and then give them a little bit more of what they need. And loop around there until time is up, or until the goal that you want to hit. And then work on catalyzing the next steps. So get them set up with the right mindsets and exercises or whatever you need to get them to go forward. And like really push on that. Like get them to verbally say, I will do that. Then all of this is underpinned by mindset and metacognition. I just noticed a spelling mistake. So bad. I think I'm just going to move on, guys. So metacognition. What is that? So metacognition is the awareness and understanding of one's own thought processes. It's thinking about thinking. It's understanding how minds work. It's really, really helpful to know about that. So, and you as a teacher should put effort into knowing about that. Like, for me, teaching code has always been an interesting thing because the way I've seen it is like I teach code in order to teach the person how to teach themselves code and other things. And so I need to have an idea of like the process of learning and share that process rather than just sharing the outcome of that process. It's like if I want to teach a person to drive, and so we drive to the shops. The goal isn't to drive to the shops, the goal is the process. So yeah, you want to get an idea of how learning works and you want to be able to get that across to the student. So teach them how to learn. There are good books on this, by the way, and I do have links to those good books in this presentation, which I will share. It's also useful to know that some teaching techniques are more powerful than others. So here's one example. What do you think is more effective? Like if I just give a learner information, or if I ask them a question, let them think about it, and then give them the information? So there's two in that question, right? The next thing to zoom in on is actually that loop of assessing their understanding and illuminating. Start with assessing. Why is there a test to Well, when you're understanding a learner, you want to be a little bit detective. You want to be a mind reader. You want to be a scientist. So the way I think about it is I'll come up with theories about how their brain is working at a point in time and ask questions and say like, what do you think this will do? What do you think that will do? How would you explain that? And by doing that, I get a good picture of where they're at, and also like I can get some theories about assumptions that they might have made, and I can test those assumptions. When testing those assumptions, I must work to maintain a good signal-to-noise ratio. So if I ask a learner a question, hey, what will this code do? Then I need to ask the question in a way that's clear to the learner. Like if they get it wrong because I was just like, not making myself clear, then that's a bad signal for me. So I want to make sure that if they get the question wrong, it's because they don't have the understanding that they should have at this point. I should, like, if I ask them a trick question and they get it wrong, then it could be because I successfully tricked them, or it could be because they don't understand the concept. And so in this sense, like, trick questions are actually harming you and your goals as the educator. Then another thing is just to remember what we're training people to do. We are training coders, not parrots. So I've seen this happen a lot where a teacher will be like, hey, can you explain for loops to me, or return statements or something, and the learner will come up with a perfect textbook definition, and then they're like, sweet, you understand this, move on. It's like, no, they might have just memorized that from the internet. Those are somebody else's words. It's not even their words. Ask them what the code does. A lot of the time people memorize ways to explain things that they don't actually understand themselves, and that's especially true when people are just starting out. Like, schools teach people that memorization is understanding a lot of the time, and it's really, really not. So always, like, try to bring it back to practically what are we teaching. And try to make stuff visual as much as you want, as much as you can. So something that I really like to do is I'll come up with examples of code and put in a bunch of print statements, and the question I can ask is, what does this print? Not what does this do? Because if I say, what does this print, then there is one answer that is correct, and it has nothing, and they can't, like, it's not up for interpretation. So yeah, I can ask them that question, we can run the code, we can see if they're right or not, and it's quite a powerful thing. Then the next step is illumination. So it's all about setting up the pennies and watching the pennies drop. So generally speaking, you want to be a guide rather than a lecturer. Sometimes people are missing information and you just need to explain it, that's fine. But often you want to avoid that and lead with questions. So if I say to somebody, what will this code print? And they get it wrong, then I can say, okay, cool. How many times is this print statement run? Like, 3 times? Why? Like, why do you think it's not 2? What happens every time it prints? What happens next? What order do these lines happen in? And just asking those questions gets people to look at the code and be like, oh. So as much as possible, just lead with questions. And the more you do this, the more you'll end up with different kinds of tools and different kinds of explanations that you can keep in your pocket, and you're like, oh, if you don't understand this thing, here are 5 different ways that I know of getting people to understand this, because I've been practicing this explanation or this concept for a while. So yeah, so as you continue to move forward, you end up with a little bit of a library in your mind that is very, very helpful. So that's one of the things that builds up over time as a teacher. The next thing is trust no one, and I mean that with love. Yes. So if I explain a thing to a student and I'm like, hey, do you understand? They'll be like, yes. Don't believe them. Because there's a very good chance that they don't, or like maybe they're trying to respond in an appropriate way, or they feel uncomfortable with saying no, or they think they understand and they don't. There's a lot of illusions of competence in tech. So always like go back to assessing. Don't just be like, cool, you didn't understand the thing, now I told you the thing, now you understand the thing. Like, go back to checking if they understand the thing. Then the next step is catalyzing further growth. So set them up with ways to continue to benefit from what you did. So one thing that's interesting is that if you have a great session with some learners and you teach them a bunch of stuff and you ask them a question that by the end they're like smashing it and they're getting everything right and they provably understand it, that understanding is very largely in a short-term memory that is not necessarily going to stick around. And so you need to give people ways to get it to stick around. So retrieval practice is super, super useful. So if you say to them like, hey, after the session, just go have a cup of tea, go for a walk, however you chill out, have a chill, and then come back and see how much you remember. Like, see how many of these examples you can remember yourself. And a couple of days from now, do the same thing. See how many of these examples you can do. See how many, try to use the techniques that I use, print statements and whatnot, and push your understanding further. Like, try to extend what we did here. Get them to understand that learning is hard as well. Like, that is such a big deal, because sometimes people feel like they're struggling, they feel like they're deficient in some way, or they're doing it wrong, they should just go watch a video and that will teach them the things. Like, no, actually, when you feel that cognitive load in your mind, like, that is that is where the magic's at, so lean into it. Like if it's hard, it's working better. So that's all very, very important. And all of this is underpinned by foundational practices and mindsets. So I think one thing that's very, very important is giving people the opportunity to be wrong. So in that whole like assess and illuminate loop, we ask the learners questions, and those questions, they can come up with the wrong answer. And that should be like celebrated almost. It's like, hey, this is great. If you have the opportunity to be wrong, you have the opportunity to upgrade yourself in that specific way. So you really want to celebrate that and give them an appreciation for the fact that self-assessment is a fantastic way to learn. So say like, hey, code is cool because you can just run these experiments yourself and you can write some code, come up with a theory of what it's going to do, and check your own theory and see if you're right. Another thing that's very important along those lines is psychological safety. If you make a person feel kind of dumb every time they get something wrong, then that will be terrible. One of the best teachers I've seen, he's incredible. What he would do is he had such a good vibe about him that when the learners got questions wrong in his classes, they just break out into giggles and be like, oh, this is great, okay, let's dig into that. And that guy was a magician. But yeah, just in general, it's don't make a person feel bad if they get things wrong. But be curious about why they got it wrong, don't be frustrated with them. Celebrate the small wins. So I've already mentioned that. If somebody's struggling, and then by the end of the session they're at least understanding some of it, highlight that. Celebrate the level up. And push people to learn on their own. That's also critical because again, we're trying to plant some seeds, we're not trying to be the point source of all knowledge. The next thing I want to talk about briefly is the protege effect. So in this room here, there are a bunch of people who have taught, which is great. There's this thing called the protege effect, which basically states that if you teach a person a thing, then you absorb the knowledge better. And I'm sure many people have heard that before, but it's actually a very well-studied effect. So if you want to really master a thing, go teach it to somebody. It freaking works. And there's lots of different reasons for it. So just preparing to teach is a great way to learn. If I'm going to, I wish I had a duck or something. If I just pretend to teach my rubber duck, then it's going to help me. But then there's actually the teaching itself. That is retrieval practice, because I need to remember what I'm going to say to people. Learners ask questions when you're teaching, and that's great because it's low stakes testing of my own knowledge. And learners ask weird questions, which basically look at my own knowledge from a different direction. They do some strange things, which is great. So, yeah, I want to encourage people to find opportunities to teach because it is it's quite a rabbit hole. It's stimulating. There's a lot of different skills, and again, there's an art to it, and there's a science to it, and a study. But it's also practically useful for yourself. Yeah, so now I'm going to shamelessly plug two things that I'm working on at the moment. The first one is the Guild of Educators. I've made it kind of recently because I always wanted a guild. But basically it's for tech educators who want to connect with other tech educators and just get better at that craft. It's primarily focused at the moment on Python stuff. But yeah, if you are into education, then you can join. We spread skills, we spread opportunities, we spread resources, and one of the big things is it's a community. So a lot of people leave education because they got burnt in different ways. Tech education as a career is a hard career, and so the support structures would be nice. It would be nice to just increase the half-life of teachers. So that's what that is about. Initially, I'm focusing on Python education because that's my jam, but it's not. It's a focus and not a closed door. And so if you're should I join, shouldn't I join? Probably just join the guild, it's a jam. Yeah. So that's the one thing. And then the other thing is Prelude, which is a place where I run training. So it's also kind of a new thing. The goal is to create a learning provider that actually sets teachers up for success and growth and treats them like the experts that they are. So we do technical courses and workshops and whatnot. We also do consulting services for tech ed providers, internships, and grad programs. So if any of that sounds interesting, then chat to me about that as well. You can chat to me about any of these things. All right. So that's the end of my presentation. But I want to be a good teacher. I can give you some homework. So learn about learning. If you scan this QR code, there are links to books and things, which is great. And go teach someone. It's fun. I promise. It's great. All right. The end. There's time for questions.
Does anyone have a question for Sheena?
Thank you, Sheena. That was very insightful. I wonder about the sort of education model that you showed. And clearly, there's better learning outcomes if you have a one-to-one sort of model in class. But we know that that is very expensive. Is there an in-between that's agreeable to most sorts of learning goals?
Yeah, good question. There is an in-between, and it's actually very necessary to find it. So, if you have some, like just say content, like a course content that people need to move through, then chances are some people will need help with some things and other people won't. And so if you now say, cool, I'm going to one-on-one teach everybody all of the things, and that's probably not effective. Or it will be effective, but it's like wasteful. So the first thing is just to like help people when they need help and not when they don't. And figuring out when people need help is an art in its own, but it is a thing that you can do. And then the other thing is, instead of having it one-to-one, have one-to-few, like 1-2-3, something like that. And like with some things it's like way easier to teach one-to-one. Like if you're doing some kind of problem-solving thing, often one-to-one is easier. But there are ways to get a small group to interact in a healthy way. So that's good. And then again, like sometimes like Sage on the Stage stuff is really useful. Like at the beginning of a course, something like that, you can be like, cool, this is the way we're heading. And you can plant some good seeds like for a group as a whole. So yeah, so there's a whole lot of different ways that you can contribute. But yeah, like monitoring people's actual experience, like abilities, is the crux of this.
Anybody else?
Morning. So, I'm from Meeting Conference and we do like a peer-to-peer based learning. How effective do you think that would be as compared to just someone standing?
Good question, very good question. There's pros and cons. So, for an untrained teacher, teaching somebody else, somebody who hasn't actually been trained to teach well, like they're probably the ones who are going to benefit most from the actual teaching. It depends a little bit on what's being taught. So I've seen good things and I've seen bad things. So one of the bad things that I've seen is that like if you have a student and they learn a bunch of stuff and they're not 100% sure of why this matters, but somebody told them it's important, so now they always do this thing, cargo culting, and now that student is meant to get somebody else up to a certain level. And they'll say things like, do this because it's important. And then like the knowledge will flow through, but it'll be like a leaky channel because the student isn't an expert teacher. And teaching actually does have expertise. There is a skill set here and it's worth training people on it. So it's a leaky channel, and then there'll be like another leaky channel from that student to the next one, and from that student to the next one. So I've seen this go very badly in education providers, where just like everybody's code looks the same at the end, and nobody's really sure why it's like they're doing it that way. So it can go badly, but it can also go really well. So I think that it's something that you need to keep your battles about. I think getting people to introduce each other to different concepts is a big deal, and having like people that are on your side, like the community aspect, is actually really, really powerful. To have people like me who are learning like me, like that's really powerful. So yeah, pros and cons. You do need experts as well. I've seen a lot of places that don't necessarily put enough emphasis on the skill of teaching. Like they'll hire a software developer who wants to be a good teacher, and I think that's a good start. But the skills of teaching aren't always completely obvious. I've seen very big brain, very big hearted, very experienced people do stuff with like, oh, why are you wasting the students' time like that? So yeah, there is definitely skill involved. Yeah. And there was a question about
Or just another question. So in the peer-to-peer based learning, right? Let's say, for example, we had some facility to make sure that everything goes well. How would they handle, for example, cliques forming within the students, where some kids progress much more than others?
Yeah, that's true. That's very true. And I think there's also like there's cliques progressing at different speeds. There's also problems with like people riding along, and they might be pre-riding because they just like, oh, these guys are doing work, or they might be pre-riding because they just actually can't keep up. And so I think it is necessary to mix people up over time and say like, cool, let's shift it around and you're working together, instead of just letting people stay with who they're comfortable with. But I don't think it's a simple thing to get right. So group work is tough to get right. It's really tough to get right because of the freeloading problem. So what I think is necessary is like first you teach people the foundational skills on their own and like let them prove that they have the skills on their own. And then after that, put them into groups. So like now you get to exercise those skills, and you also have to exercise teamwork skills at the same time and hold each other accountable at the same time. And so it's like you stack those skills. You don't try to teach it all at the same time. Yeah.
All right, guys, can I give a round of applause for Sharon? Guys, can we sit a bit closer together? Just fill up the empty slots here in front, please.